You already sense that something is different. There is a feeling deep within you, in that quiet part of yourself where you withdrew after they shattered your trust and walked away as though you meant nothing. Something has shifted, and although you have changed through everything you survived, the bigger change is happening somewhere inside them. Beneath your exhaustion, beneath the grief, beneath all those years of wondering whether you were imagining things or asking yourself how someone who claimed to love you could treat you as though you were completely disposable, there has always been a part of you waiting for this moment. Not because you wanted revenge, not because you wanted them to suffer. You waited because somewhere inside, you knew the truth would eventually reveal itself, even if it took time. The person listening right now has survived something that outsiders often cannot understand. What happened to you was not simply a painful breakup or an ordinary betrayal. You were gradually pushed away from your own sense of reality. Your memories were questioned. Your feelings were dismissed. Your instincts were attacked. Your value was repeatedly made to feel uncertain until you started doubting the very person you were. You trusted someone with your vulnerability and gave them access to the deepest parts of your emotional world, only to discover that those very parts could be turned against you. Your compassion became leverage. Your insecurities became weapons. And after they had taken everything they could from the relationship, they could walk away as if none of it had ever mattered. Then came the part that was perhaps hardest to understand. They appeared completely fine. They smiled, met new people, created new connections, and presented themselves as though they had escaped without carrying any consequences. Worse, they often created an entirely different version of the story, one where they were innocent and you were somehow the problem. Meanwhile, you were left alone with the confusion, trying to understand how someone capable of causing so much damage could appear untouched. But remember this distinction. Looking unaffected does not mean being unaffected. A person can smile while falling apart internally. Someone can enter another relationship without actually healing. Moving forward physically does not necessarily mean becoming emotionally free. Some consequences take time to become visible, and you cannot always measure what is happening inside another person by what they choose to display. If these words are touching something familiar inside you, stay with that feeling instead of pushing it away. You may have spent a long time believing that what happened to you was somehow your fault, but recognizing the pattern can become part of taking your power back. And before we go further, subscribe to Narcissist Mind and turn on notifications. This channel exists for people who have experienced manipulation, emotional confusion, betrayal, and the kind of psychological pain that is difficult to explain to anyone who has never lived through it. Here, you can find language for experiences you once could not describe. You can begin recognizing patterns that once seemed impossible to understand. Subscribing is more than pressing a button. It can be a personal reminder that your healing deserves attention, that your voice matters, and that rebuilding yourself is worth continuing. Now let us look at what may actually be unfolding beneath the surface. There is a powerful principle that operates through human behavior, regardless of how charming, persuasive, or socially successful someone appears. You cannot permanently hide reality simply by performing a better version of yourself. Words can manipulate people temporarily, appearances can create illusions, and charisma can open doors. But none of those things erase what a person repeatedly does. Consequences may not arrive according to the schedule we want, and they may not always look dramatic from the outside. Yet patterns eventually produce results. The narcissistic person who repeatedly deceives, exploits, controls, and discards others is not somehow protected from the consequences of those patterns simply because they appear successful. No matter how convincing the performance becomes, reality continues accumulating underneath it. The first sign is subtle, which is why many people miss it. The narcissist begins struggling to keep the image intact. To understand this, you have to look beneath the confidence they display. Their apparent certainty can require enormous effort, because maintaining a carefully constructed identity demands constant attention. They have to present themselves as successful, desirable, powerful, innocent, or superior, depending on the audience in front of them. The image must constantly be reinforced because their sense of self depends heavily on external validation. What appears effortless from the outside can therefore become an exhausting performance behind closed doors. They may have practiced this behavior for so many years that the performance feels natural to them. But even a mask that has been worn for decades can eventually become difficult to hold in place when enough pressure begins building underneath it. Every relationship they destroy can leave another fracture in that carefully maintained image. Every person who eventually recognizes the manipulation represents another crack. A friend becomes distant. A partner stops believing the explanations. A coworker notices the contradictions. Someone who once defended them begins asking uncomfortable questions. These events may seem unrelated, but together they can weaken the social structure supporting the narcissist's identity. They do not necessarily experience these losses as opportunities for reflection. Instead, they may interpret them as attacks, betrayals, jealousy, or evidence that everyone else is against them. Yet, the cracks continue spreading. The more people who independently notice the same pattern, the harder it becomes to maintain the illusion that nothing is wrong. Eventually, the image requires more energy to protect than it once did. You may notice the change through small behavioral details rather than one dramatic event. Their stories may stop matching. One explanation contradicts another. The effortless charm you once witnessed may begin feeling forced. Patience suddenly turns into irritation. Warmth disappears and is replaced by contempt. A harmless disagreement produces an unusually intense reaction. Someone who previously seemed calm may become visibly reactive whenever their image is questioned. Sometimes other people begin noticing too. The individuals who once praised and defended them may become quieter. Friends may create distance. Former allies may stop participating in their version of events. And because these changes often happen gradually, the narcissist may attempt to compensate by becoming even more visible, posting constantly, exaggerating achievements, explaining themselves excessively, or trying harder than ever to convince everyone that their life is perfect. Real confidence rarely requires constant proof. A person who genuinely feels secure does not normally need to repeatedly announce how successful, happy, powerful, or desirable they are. When someone becomes increasingly dependent on public validation, excessive self-promotion can sometimes reveal insecurity rather than strength. You may see sudden attempts to attract attention, unexpected messages after long periods of silence, or dramatic displays designed to make sure others know they are supposedly thriving. These behaviors should not automatically be interpreted as evidence of collapse, because people behave differently for many reasons. But when they occur alongside increasing contradictions, unstable relationships, angry reactions, and desperate attempts to control perception, they can reveal that maintaining the image has become increasingly difficult. There is another important psychological pattern. People who repeatedly hurt others may not process those relationships in the same way a deeply empathetic person does. Instead of grieving, reflecting, taking responsibility, and integrating the experience, they may push the memories aside and move toward the next source of stimulation or validation. The past becomes something they avoid rather than something they understand. But avoidance does not make unresolved experiences disappear. The more relationships that end badly, the more memories, conflicts, accusations, and damaged connections accumulate behind them. Eventually, the emotional material they refused to process can become increasingly difficult to escape. They may change partners, environments, social circles, or identities, but wherever they go, the same internal patterns travel with them. Changing the scenery cannot automatically change the person creating the pattern. This is why the second sign can become even more profound. The narcissist may increasingly experience the emptiness they spent years attempting to avoid. One of the hardest realizations during recovery is understanding that the connection you believed you were building may not have existed in the way you imagined. The intense attention, idealization, emotional closeness, and promises may have felt incredibly authentic to you. You experienced those moments through genuine attachment and vulnerability. But a person who relies heavily on admiration, control, and external validation may approach intimacy very differently. The connection can become less about mutual emotional closeness and more about what the relationship provides psychologically. When the attention fades or the other person stops supplying the desired validation, the emotional intensity may disappear just as quickly as it arrived. The problem is that external validation can temporarily cover an internal sense of emptiness, but it cannot permanently resolve it. New attention can create excitement. New admiration can provide reassurance. A new relationship can offer another opportunity to feel desirable and important. The cycle may continue through idealization, disappointment, devaluation, separation, and another search for someone new. For a while, this movement can keep uncomfortable feelings buried beneath constant stimulation. But eventually, the supply becomes less satisfying. People become more difficult to impress. Partners notice patterns sooner. Former victims share experiences. New relationships encounter the same underlying behaviors. The person may keep searching for another source of validation, while finding that the temporary relief never lasts as long as it once did. When that external noise begins to decrease, silence becomes harder to escape. Without someone constantly providing admiration, reassurance, attention, or emotional reactions, the person is left with themselves. For someone who has spent years avoiding genuine self-reflection, that can be deeply uncomfortable. The silence may bring anxiety, restlessness, irritation, or an intense need to create another distraction. This does not necessarily mean the person suddenly develops healthy remorse or understands the damage they caused. Genuine accountability requires emotional capacities that cannot be assumed simply because someone experiences distress. What may emerge instead is an uncomfortable awareness that something is wrong within their life. They may feel dissatisfied without understanding why, lonely despite being surrounded by people, or restless even after achieving the attention they thought would finally make them feel complete. Imagine constantly being surrounded by people and still feeling completely disconnected from them. Imagine having someone beside you, but being unable to experience genuine emotional closeness. Imagine spending years searching outside yourself for the thing you believe will finally make you feel whole, only to discover that every new source of validation eventually loses its power. That can become a deeply painful cycle. The person seeks another relationship, another achievement, another audience, another person to admire them, or another situation they can control. For a short time, the discomfort becomes quieter. Then the effect fades, and the search begins again. The outside world keeps changing, while the internal problem remains untouched. This is why repeatedly replacing people does not necessarily resolve the emptiness underneath the pattern. And when that cycle becomes increasingly difficult to sustain, Their thoughts may become darker and more repetitive. They may replay old conflicts, revisit perceived betrayals, obsess over people who rejected them, or repeatedly reconstruct situations in which they believe someone else was responsible. This should not automatically be confused with remorse. Thinking about a past relationship does not mean someone regrets how they treated you. Sometimes people revisit old situations because they are still angry, because they feel humiliated, because they want to rewrite what happened, or because they cannot accept losing control over the narrative. They may remember the person they hurt not because they understand that person's pain, but because the relationship represented something they wanted and could no longer access. That distinction matters enormously when you are healing. Over time, the circle around them can become smaller. People who once tolerated certain behaviors may eventually become exhausted. Some remain because of obligation, fear, habit, financial dependence, or other complicated circumstances. But even those relationships can become emotionally distant. When fewer people are willing to absorb the manipulation, there are fewer places to redirect blame. The old strategies may stop working as effectively. The person who once seemed able to control every situation may discover that others are no longer responding according to the old script. That can create frustration and desperation. They may try harder to control the narrative, become more aggressive in defending themselves, or search for new people who have not yet recognized the pattern. But the underlying problem remains unchanged, because the real issue was never simply the people around them. And this is where your story becomes different from theirs. You were forced to sit with pain that you never asked for. You had to face confusion, grief, loneliness, and the frightening process of rebuilding your identity after someone repeatedly made you question yourself. You eventually began learning how to recognize your own feelings again. You started separating your reality from someone else's version of events. You learned that being compassionate does not require tolerating mistreatment, and that loving someone does not mean surrendering your boundaries. You survived the emptiness they projected onto you, and through that survival, you developed an emotional awareness they may never have cultivated. Your healing does not require watching them suffer. Your freedom does not depend on their downfall. The greatest shift happens when their behavior stops determining how you see yourself. So if you are waiting for some dramatic moment when the universe suddenly exposes everything they have done, remember that consequences do not always arrive in a form you can witness. Sometimes the consequence is simply repeating the same destructive pattern until every new relationship begins resembling the old one. Sometimes it is losing people who once believed the performance. Sometimes it is living with constant dissatisfaction, despite appearing successful. Sometimes it is realizing that admiration cannot create intimacy, and control cannot create love. You do not need to monitor their life to prove that reality is working. You do not need to investigate their relationships, check their social media, or wait for a message confirming that they finally understand. Your healing becomes stronger when you stop requiring evidence from the person who once taught you to doubt yourself. That is why the deepest form of justice may not be seeing them fall. It may be becoming completely unavailable to the version of you they once controlled. The person they manipulated is no longer standing where they left you. You have questioned yourself, rebuilt yourself, and learned to trust your own perception again. You have discovered that their rejection did not define your worth, and their approval was never proof of your value. They may continue telling whatever story protects their image, but you no longer need to participate in it. You know what you experienced. You know what you survived. And the more firmly you stand in that truth, the less power their version of reality has over your present life. That is not revenge. That is recovery. That is what reclaiming yourself actually looks like. Stay with me, because there is another layer to this that most people overlook. The consequences of destructive behavior are not always visible as punishment. Sometimes they appear as repetition. The same arguments keep happening with different people. The same accusations return in different relationships. The same need for admiration appears under different circumstances. The names change, the environment changes, and the story changes, but the underlying pattern remains remarkably similar. This is why you should not assume that someone has transformed simply because they have a new partner, a new career, a new social circle, or a polished public image. External changes can happen quickly. Genuine psychological change requires self-awareness, accountability, and sustained behavioral transformation. Without those things, a new beginning can simply become another chapter in an old cycle. And perhaps the most important thing for you to remember is this: you do not need to become consumed by what happens to them next. You spent enough time studying their moods, reactions, contradictions, expectations, and emotional states. You spent enough time trying to predict what would make them happy, what would make them angry, and what version of yourself might finally earn stable love. That constant monitoring was part of the exhaustion. Now your attention belongs somewhere else. It belongs to your own life, your peace, your boundaries, your relationships, your future. Let them carry the consequences of their choices without making yourself responsible for delivering those consequences. You have already carried enough. The goal is not to watch someone else lose everything. The goal is to build a life so grounded that their behavior can no longer take anything from you. You survived being made to feel like nothing, and now you are learning that you were never nothing. You were simply standing in a relationship where your value was repeatedly reflected back to you through someone else's distorted lens. Their inability to recognize your humanity was never evidence that you lacked it. Their inability to love you in a healthy way was never proof that you were unlovable. Their decision to discard you was never a measurement of your worth. You were valuable before they entered your life, valuable while you were suffering, and valuable after they left. The difference now is that you are beginning to believe it without needing someone else to confirm it. And once that belief becomes rooted inside you, the power of the old dynamic begins to disappear. So take a breath and let this truth settle. You do not have to chase closure. You do not have to force justice. You do not have to wait for an apology that may never come. You do not have to stand at the window watching their life for evidence that they finally received what they deserved. Your responsibility is much more sacred than that. You are responsible for rebuilding the part of yourself that was taught to distrust its own voice. You are responsible for protecting the boundaries you once abandoned to keep someone else comfortable. You are responsible for choosing relationships where respect does not have to be begged for, and where love does not require you to disappear. The moment you choose yourself consistently, the chapter begins changing, whether they ever realize it or not. And that is where your real transformation begins. Not when they collapse, not when they return, not when they finally admit what they did. It begins when you no longer need any of those things to know that you survived. The person who once believed they needed that narcissist's approval can become someone who no longer recognizes that version of themselves. You can become calmer, clearer, more discerning, and more protective of your peace. You can stop confusing intensity with intimacy and attention with love. You can recognize manipulation without becoming obsessed with exposing it. You can walk away without needing the other person to understand why. That is the freedom they could never give you. because it was never theirs to give. It was yours all along, waiting beneath everything they tried to take from you. If there is a deeper lesson in all of this, it is that consequences often emerge through repetition rather than spectacle. When a person refuses to examine themselves, the same patterns can follow them into every new chapter. The same conflicts return with different names. The same accusations appear in different relationships. The same emotional hunger keeps demanding satisfaction. The same need for control keeps creating distance. Eventually, the person may become surrounded by people, yet remain emotionally isolated, because genuine intimacy requires vulnerability, honesty, and accountability. You cannot manipulate someone into safely loving you. You cannot control someone into trusting you. You cannot demand emotional closeness while punishing vulnerability. The behaviors used to create power can ultimately destroy the very connection the person claims to want. Your role is not to become the judge of that process. Your role is to step outside it. You have already spent too much energy trying to understand their psychology, predict their reactions, and figure out what you could have done differently. There is a point where understanding becomes another form of attachment. If you keep using it to monitor the person who hurt you, learn what you need to learn, but then turn your attention back toward your own life. Ask different questions now. What do I want? What makes me feel safe? What boundaries do I need? What kind of people deserve access to me? What did I abandon in myself to keep that relationship alive? What parts of myself am I ready to reclaim? Those questions lead you somewhere new. Their behavior does not. You were never waiting for their downfall as much as you were waiting for your own peace. Somewhere beneath the anger and grief was a deeper desire to understand that you were not crazy, that your pain had a reason, and that your life could become larger than what happened to you. Perhaps the shift you have been feeling is not actually about them at all. Perhaps it is about the growing distance between who you were during that relationship and who you are becoming now. Their influence is weakening because your self-awareness is strengthening. Their story matters less because your own understanding matters more. Their approval is becoming irrelevant because you are learning to validate yourself. That is a transformation no one else can take away from you. So keep going. Keep rebuilding your life in ways that feel honest and safe. Keep listening to your instincts. Keep strengthening your boundaries. Keep choosing relationships where respect is mutual and affection does not come with punishment. Keep remembering that you do not need to become cruel simply because someone was cruel to you. You do not need to become emotionally closed because someone misused your openness. You can remain compassionate while becoming discerning. You can remain loving while becoming selective. You can remain soft without allowing anyone to walk over you. Your healing does not require you to become the opposite of who you were. It requires you to become more fully yourself, with wisdom added to the qualities that once made you vulnerable.